For those of you unfamiliar with Bargello, it is a style and needlepoint characterized by its bold repeating patterns and its use of long vertical stitches. It first gained popularity in the 60s and 70s and has re-emerged with a new modern twist. Now on to our craft. To make this planter, you'll need a plastic canvas, your yarn in 4 different shades. Most Bargello projects will call for tapestry yarn, but regular knitting yarn will work just fine for this. You'll also need a tapestry needle, and of course your pattern. Let's take a closer look at the pattern for a sec. This shows the color sequence of each row, and also where to start your pattern. There's a lot going on there, but this is the base pattern that you will see repeated throughout the whole thing. You can see where each stitch starts and ends, and just so you don't have to count every square in the pattern, just note that each stitch will be 4 squares long. Grab your yarn and cut a 2.5 foot piece of your starting color. If you received a kit from the library, just cut the included pieces in half. Using a piece of yarn much longer than that can cause more tangling, and nobody wants that. Threading a needle with yarn is kind of a nightmare, but with this handy trick you no longer have to dread it. Just cut yourself a thin strip of paper, fold it around the yarn, feed the ends of the paper through the needle, and pull it through. It's like magic. Okay, let's get stitching. For a lot of Bargello patterns, you would have to find the center line and count up from there to see where to start. But for this one, the pattern we are repeating conveniently starts right at the top corner. So grab your canvas and go down 3 rows and over 3 columns to make your first stitch. Starting from the back, pull the yarn through until there is a tail about 1 inch or so long. We're not tying any knots. Our container we're covering won't fit if there are big bumps on the back of the canvas. Remember, each stitch is 4 squares long, and the square you came up through counts as square 1, so count down 3 more to complete your stitch. Make sure to keep a hold of the tail on the back so you don't pull it through. If your yarn bunches up, just pull the yarn straight and gently pull it through. Don't yank or force it, because the plastic canvas can rip. The pattern shows that I'll be making 2 stitches in a row before I move down. Position the tail where your next stitch will go, and come up next to where you started the last one and make your stitch. And the tail is secure. Continue stitching over it until it's covered. I know that I have to move down, so let's take a look at the pattern to see where to start stitching. It looks like I will start 3 squares down from the last stitches, keep checking to make sure that tail is being secured. Make sure to keep following your pattern. And if you do make a mistake, it's easy enough to pull the yarn back through and get back on course. Be mindful that you start in the right spot when your pattern direction goes up. Sometimes it can be tricky. Luckily, you won't have to count so much as you go along because it should mirror what you've already stitched. This first row is important to get right though. because you will go off of it throughout the rest of the pattern. When you notice your yarn is getting short, just flip your canvas over and run your needle under a length of stitches to secure it. Cut off the end as close to the canvas as possible for a nice clean finish. To start a new piece, run your needle under in the opposite direction until the end is covered. Be careful not to pull too hard when you start again, but the end will be nice and secure after a few stitches. When you get to the end of the row, secure and trim your yarn and get your next color ready. For the rest of the rows, you no longer have to stitch over the tail. You just run your needle under 4 or 5 stitches and start from there. When you start a new color, your stitches will share a hole with the ones in the previous row. So come up through the bottom of the last row stitch and continue to follow the pattern, making sure that each stitch is still 4 squares long. This project can be put down and picked back up later easily. But you'll find that you can get into a groove, and the more you get through the pattern, the quicker each row is to stitch. And then you're all done. Well, kinda. It looks beautiful just like this, but now we'll create the cover for your planter. Your canvas should have a border of 2 rows around it and some extra room on the end. These extra rows are insurance. The pattern was designed to fit your container, but sometimes the extra bulk of all the stitches can throw off the size. Wrap the canvas around the jar. The edge should line up with your stitches. If the canvas doesn't reach, just extend your pattern however many rows you would need to get it lined up. Once you've ensured that the pattern covers your jar, trim off the extra canvas, leaving a border of 2 rows. Cut as close to the line as possible so that the edge is nice and smooth. We will have to attach the 2 ends to make the planter cover. Overlap the 2-row border ends and clip them together. The clip is essential. It's very difficult to focus on stitching and keeping things lined up when you're battling springy canvas. Thread your needle with the darkest color yarn in your kit and secure it under a few stitches in the corner on the back of the canvas. Feel free to do this before clipping the ends together. In hindsight, it might have been easier. You live and you learn. Also, you'll notice that I'm using 2 clips, but quickly realize that only 1 is necessary. To start joining those ends, okay, follow me here. Bring your thread up through the top corner of where your stitching begins on the opposite side of where you secured your thread. And go back down through the top corner on the opposite side to complete your stitch. Make sure you are going through the stitched columns on both sides so all the canvas is being covered. You might have to push the stitches to the side to get your needle in there. Continue stitching the seam together all the way down until you get to the canvas border along the bottom. It's a bit awkward and flimsy at first, but it gets easier as you stitch more of the seam together. When you get to the end, run your needle down the seam to secure the yarn and trim off the tail. For the last finishing touch, we will stitch around the remaining canvas edges. Start your thread on the inside seam, go around the outside edge, and back down where the seams meet. Continue the edging stitch all the way around the top and bottom until the remaining canvas is covered. It's time consuming, but it's worth it when you have an eye-catching new piece to slide over your boring jar. Add a pop of green to your colorful planter project, or brighten up your dreary desktop with your new psychedelic organizer. Don't worry if you didn't get a kit. In the video description there is a link to the PDF of the pattern and where to find the containers used. Have fun! Enjoy!